Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a piece of technology that our sources describe as not just a record, but a memory-making medium. We are, of course, talking about the compact cassette tape. So our mission today is pretty clear. We need to unpack the whole story of this amazing little analog object. We'll track its evolution, from a simple dictation tool to a high-fidelity platform, and dig into the science behind the four main tape types. And finally, we'll try to figure out why on earth the cassette is still so magnetic in our digital world.
Well, what's really key to understand from the get-go is that this story starts with convenience, not quality. Philips introduced it in 1963, and the whole point was for it to be easy, small, and tough. But it quickly became a revolution. It fueled the whole portable music scene of the analog era. I mean, its real genius was setting the stage for the Walkman, for home recording, and for that global culture of sharing music that really defined a generation.
Let's trace that history then. So if 1963 is the invention, and it's just for mono recording, the sources say the 1970s is when it really breaks through for music, right?
Precisely. The 70s were crucial. That's when manufacturers finally standardized players with stereo-compatible heads.
Okay, so that made high-quality music a real possibility.
Exactly. And that's when Type I, or normal tape, became the default. The big thing here wasn't just the tape, though. It was the spread of affordable portable decks. That set the stage for everything that came next.
And the 1980s. That's always called the golden age of refinement. It's funny to think how much engineering went into making this little plastic thing sound good.
Oh, absolutely. The demand for better sound just pushed the material science into overdrive.
This is when we get the new tape types.
Exactly. The 80s brought us Type 2, the high position or chrome tape, and the legendary Type 4, the metal tape. And this wasn't just a small tweak. This was a fundamental chemical and magnetic upgrade. The whole goal was to expand the dynamic range and nail those high-frequency sounds to deliver true hi-fi on a cassette.
But that push for fidelity eventually ran into a brick wall, didn't it?
It did. The brick wall was digital technology. The sources are pretty clear that by the 1990s, the CD's rise led to the format's, let's say, general decay in the mainstream.
But it didn't just disappear.
No, and that's the critical caveat. It absolutely persisted. It lost the big market battle, for sure, but it became the go-to format for DIY recording, for bands trading demos, and for whole scenes like early hip-hop and indie music.
Where I guess the low cost and the aesthetic were more important than perfect sound.
That's it. It was a titan that shrank, but in doing so, really solidified its own unique place in culture.
That's a perfect transition, actually, into the core technical challenge. The magnetic particles themselves. We have to talk about these four tape types. This is where it gets really fascinating.
It does. I mean, the tapes are classified into these four types based entirely on their magnetic coating. And those tiny particles dictate everything about the audio quality.
Okay, let's start with Type I, the normal tape. This is the one most of us probably use for taping songs off the radio.
Right. Type I uses standard iron oxide. It was reliable, it gave a balanced sound, but its big weakness was always the high frequencies. It just struggled to capture them cleanly.
The workhorse tape.
The workhorse, exactly. For voice, for general music, it was cheap and it was everywhere.
Then came the upgrade, Type II, the chrome tape. What did that change actually do?
Type 2 used chromium oxide, and it was a real game changer. It offered just significantly better high-frequency performance and better noise reduction right away.
You needed a deck with a special setting for it, though.
You did, the chrome setting, but the payoff was huge. This was the tape that let people make really high-quality recordings at home.
Now, the sources mention a Type 3, which sort of came and went. Why didn't it stick?
Type 3, or ferric chrome, was an attempt at a hybrid. It mixed the materials from Type I and Type 2, trying to be better than normal but cheaper than chrome.
But the market didn't go for it.
Not really. It seems people figured if you were going to upgrade, you'd just go all the way to chrome or later to metal. So Type 3 is now, as the sources say, almost entirely discontinued.
Which brings us to the top of the mountain, Type 4, the metal tape.
Type 4, the absolute peak. Instead of using metallic oxides, it used pure metal particles.
And that made a huge difference.
A fundamental difference. It had vastly superior magnetic properties. That translated directly into the highest possible signal-to-noise ratio and the ability to capture incredibly high frequencies without the tape saturating. It was the only choice for recording CDs.
Let's get to the numbers then, because it's one thing to say better fidelity, but how much better are we talking?
The audible difference was profound. Let's look at frequency characteristics, so the ceiling of the sound. Normal tape, it topped out at around 12 kilohertz.
12. Wow. So you're losing all that top-end sparkle.
All of it. The shimmer from cymbals, the air in a vocal, the fine detail in strings. It's just not there.
And the other types fix that.
Massively. Type 2 chrome pushed that up to about 15 kilohertz. But Type 4 metal, that could potentially reach 18 kilohertz.
So that's a 6 kilohertz difference between the basic tape and the best one.
Right. And that meant listeners could finally hear true articulation and harmonics. It pushed the cassette into genuine high-fidelity territory.
Okay, and the other big enemy of tape, the hiss, the SN ratio.
Exactly. And the improvement there is maybe even more significant. Your Type I tape had a signal-to-noise ratio of about 50 to 55 decibels. You can hear that hiss, especially in quiet parts.
Definitely.
Type 2 chrome got you to around 60 dB. But Type 4 metal, it approached 70 dB. That is a massive reduction in the inherent noise. You're going from acceptable to near silent.
But getting that kind of performance wasn't just about the tape, was it? The sources mentioned special hardware, like ferrite heads.
That's a great point. As the tapes got better, they got harder to record on, magnetically speaking. You needed heads that could generate a much stronger magnetic field without wearing out. Ferrite heads were tougher and could handle the higher currents needed for Type 2 and 4V tapes.
And what about this bias signal? The sources flag it as critical, but it's a bit of an obscure concept.
Think of the bias signal as a high-frequency lubricant for the magnetic particles on the tape.
A lubricant?
Sort of. When you try to record a signal, the particles resist being rearranged. This causes a lot of distortion and noise. The bias is a super high-frequency signal, way above our hearing, that gets mixed in. It essentially shakes up the particles, making them much more willing to align with the audio signal.
Okay, that makes sense.
And since Type 4V metal particles are magnetically tougher, they needed a much stronger shove, a higher bias, current, to record properly. Using the wrong bias would just ruin the sound, which is why the industry standardized the settings for each tape.
So even with all that tech, the cassette still maxed out well below a CD, yet people talk about this analog warmth. What is that scientifically?
The warmth it's really a beautiful technical failure. When you record a signal too loudly on a tape, the magnetic particles literally run out of room. They can't store any more signal, so they compress the sound.
So it's a natural compression.
Exactly. We call it tape saturation. It gently rounds off the harsh peaks and adds these subtle, pleasing harmonics, especially to lower frequencies. It adds a kind of punch or glue to drums and bass that many people just preferred over the, brittle perfection of early digital.
That brings us to the drawbacks, though, because anyone who had a Walkman remembers the hassle, the pencil for rewinding a chewed-up tape.
Oh, the physical hassle was real, and the technical disadvantages were just as stark. Tapes wear out, they stretch. Sound quality could vary wildly depending on your machine, or if you remembered to clean the heads. It was a fragile medium.
And yet, despite all that, it's having this huge comeback. The sources call it the analog resurgence.
It's more than just a novelty. It's a key release format now, especially for indie bands and in the hip-hop scene.
Yeah.
It's a tangible, physical object in a world of streaming.
And for a new band, I imagine it's much cheaper to press tapes than vinyl.
Way cheaper. And faster. It's become the perfect DIY platform all over again.
And that DIY spirit is key. I mean, it wasn't just for pop music. It was the foundation for entire genres.
Absolutely. Look at the examples in the sources. You've got foundational hip-hop like Run DMC's King of Rock or Dr. Dre's Let Me Ride.
Yeah, genres built on sampling, on manipulating sound on tape.
Exactly. But you also had classic rock. You had experimental ambient stuff like the Environment's field recordings. You even had art pop like the Art of Noise. The cassette was it was the universal vehicle.
It democratized distribution on a global scale.
It really did. Its portability and ease of recording let these niche scenes grow entirely through copying and exchange. It's what Philips intended all along.
So what does this all mean for you listening now? The cassette story is really one of incredibly fast refinement. It went from a simple monodictation tool in '63 to a genuine hi-fi format by the '80s.
The real takeaway here is that the cassette just hit a perfect sweet spot. It was handy and analog, so much easier than vinyl, way more accessible than early CDs. It truly democratized recording and listening for everyone.
And even though it's technically inferior to digital,
its unique sound, its ease of use, and its physical nature just ensure that the culture it created is still loved today.
and That enduring love for a format with so many known flaws, it raises one last provocative thought for you to think about. Given that cassettes fueled this huge DIY culture, the rise of hip-hop, and all this radical experimentation, how much did the very limitations of this physical analog medium actually force and encourage entirely new forms of creativity that we still celebrate today? Something to rewind and reflect on.